But we begin this morning with the big changes being made to what was called Common Core testing in our local schools. Hugely unpopular on Long Island, with well over half the students opting out amidst parent protest over concerns that tests were too difficult, that there was too much testing, and that it was too tied into teacher performance, all without adequate student or school staff preparation. Well, this year, state education officials are slowly backing away from many of its controversial components, including changing the name, reducing testing, and delaying further into the future, and possibly for good, the proposed tougher standards for students to even get a passing grade. And joining us now is someone who's been closely tracking these changes. He is Brian Sales, the president of the Nassau Suffolk School Boards Association, which represents the great majority of school boards on Long Island. And welcome to the show, Mr. Sales.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, detail for our viewers, what about Common Core has been changed in the last year? Because there's a few things, right?
Yeah, so they've made changes. I think the State Ed Department, the Commissioner of Education, along with the Board of Regents, are making progress in that regard in terms of making changes to make things better. The unfortunate part is that the legislature has not done anything to make some changes on their part, and so that hinders the ability for the Commissioner and the Board of Regents to actually make all the necessary changes that would be needed.
Yeah, people are not always clear on that. There's so many parties involved here. A lot of times they think it's the governor, but it's actually the Board of Regents, then you have the chancellor, then you have the state legislature. What role does the state legislature play in this, and what part have they not responded to that you and others are concerned about and think they should be doing?
Well, so as you know, they imposed the ruling that testing should be tied to teachers' evaluations.
So particularly that, because that's
right.
The big stumbling block.
That is the big sticking point, and it's, from our perspective, it is unfair in terms of the students are all different, and so the ability to, actually use that data in a useful manner to evaluate teachers, it's just not good. It doesn't work.
And is that what has driven the protest?
I would say by and large. And so, and the other part of it is that the rollout, obviously, we all know the rollout wasn't as pretty as it could have been in terms of creating that confusion between Common Core, the testing, and then the evaluation with the teachers.
And of course, you have people on the other side of this. You say, look, we've been hearing for years from community colleges that people are coming in from schools not prepared, that they have to do remedial courses. We need these higher standards. There are even some groups that are protesting the protesters, saying, look, you're watering down the standards we need for our students to be able to compete in a global economy.
Well, I think everyone's in favor of higher standards, and we're certainly moving in that direction. I think the other thing to recognize, with the change, whether you call it Common Core or something else, we're making that change to prepare our students for critical thinking. It's an ever-changing world today, and students need to have that ability to be able to change on the fly, as opposed to maybe when you and I went to school, it was more memorization, and so now it's more about critical thinking for students, and that's what we need to do to have them prepared for the future.
Well, I have a daughter on Long Island who took the test this year and last year, and she wanted to take it. And what my view on it doesn't really matter, but I saw how difficult it was for her to even make that choice. Here's a child trying to decide whether she should join her peers who were sitting out of the test and her wanting to take the test. And there was pressure both ways. You think it's right for kids to be facing that kind of pressure, though? I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, obviously, testing is good if it's done properly in terms of we're supposed to be testing to evaluate the individual students and what their needs are. I know there's a few districts on the island now are moving towards doing adaptive testing, and so it's done on the computer, and so the computer is recognizing the ability of the student and then changes the question. So it's not everyone gets the same questions all the time. The computer's evaluating, can they answer that question? They move to a more difficult question, or they give them another easy question. That is helpful information for teachers to then customize the individual student's needs so that they can succeed.
We'll talk a little bit about what has changed. Didn't they reduce the testing or give them more time? How has that worked out? And was that implemented this year, or is that for future years?
No, so they reduced the time, they changed some of the questions, they're actually getting teachers involved in creating the questions, but still I think there's that lingering issue with everyone in terms of, it's a moratorium, but at some point it ends, which would be in 2019-20, to use those tests to evaluate teachers. I think the sad part right now is even though we're not doing that, we're still doing all the other mechanisms that were in place to do that, which essentially we're going through the process, but it doesn't count. Well, that's a lot of extra work for school districts unnecessarily. I mean, at the end of the day, for New York State, we do have a common test that everyone takes. It's called the Regents. And so kids learn at different paces, and so testing at the different grade levels, I think while it may be useful information to help those students improve if you're using it for the individual students, overall, the final Regents exam, and whether you graduate or not, says it all.
Well, the governor points out that, you know, that he needs some measure, he feels, to really prove whether a teacher is doing their job. Don't test scores in some way indicate whether a teacher has done a good job in their class?
Sure. And I know in our district, but you know, when you talk about using statistics and statistical information for people, I don't know if there's that book out there, How to Lie with Statistics. So depending on the facts and figures you want to use to suit your narrative, you can. I know in our district we're extremely successful. But if one wants to look at our 4-year graduation rate, one might say it's 83%. 5 years, 92%. So I think we're doing pretty good, especially for a district like mine, who has a lot of challenges. Again, all the students are not the same. We shouldn't treat them all the same.
Well, do you think that the opponents of what was called Common Core are going to go away, or are we going to see the same kind of protest? Is this going to satisfy them? It sounds like in many cases that they only want a complete repudiation of the whole curriculum.
Well, I think if you de-link the evaluation to the testing, that would go a long way to allowing the commissioner and the Board of Regents to do their job more efficiently and effectively, which then, in turn, I believe, would satisfy the people that are the opt-out movement.
Well, we're certainly going to find out. Brian Sales, president of the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association, been tracking all this. You'll be busy all summer, right? It's not summer off for the administrators. No. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your explaining where things stand at this controversial program at this point.
Thank you.